What up, y'all? This is Patrick Hayes, and the name of this video is Reframe Negative Thinking, how I use this super tool. Now, the super tool that I'm talking about is reframing. And in this video, I'm going to get kind of deep into my personal process of what I do to reframe the negative associations in my reality and how I kind of view that process. Now, what's a little bit different about this video than normal videos is that I'm going to try something new. I'm going to share a video clip that I recorded from a Zoom conversation with a good friend of mine, David Henry Reichenbach. And in this video, we kind of naturally and spontaneously move over this topic. And so, after the phone call, I was like, well, that was kind of cool, and I've been wanting to talk about reframing. How about I just take a clip from our conversation and I make that the video? So it's a good opportunity for me to be a little bit more informal, and I'm interested to hear what your opinion is on this video format. So please put in the comments whether you liked this and whether you'd like to see more of it, because I have some really cool conversations with a lot of different people, and it would be really fun to be able to share that part of my life with you all. Before I get started, as I play this clip, you'll see my friends talking about looking at the illusion as a gameable phenomenon. Essentially what he means by that when he says illusion is how in the East sometimes they talk about the Maya, or the illusion of physical reality. And he's talking about it being a gameable phenomenon in the sense that it's very malleable, and the way we interact with it is in a sense like, malleable. It's movable. We can game it, right? So it's this gameable phenomenon that we can create, in a sense, positive feedback loops by using certain techniques and tools or technologies for gaming our reality.
It's like looking at the illusion as like a malleable, gameable phenomenon. And I think it's like interesting to see for myself, like where I constantly slip back into some kind of degree of victim mentality. Like, oh, it's just like the way that it is. This like these things, these structures, they're like so indomitable. And it's so fun to have this conversation because, in talking with you, I'm completely refreshed with the understanding of like how every single day there's these little things I can be doing, say like stacking rocks in like a specific corner of a house before I enter it, because I'm like imbuing that rock stack with the intentionality that like when I go into this party, I'm going to be practicing like conversational calmness despite whatever like material might come up or social anxieties come up. And it's like the moment I leave that house, I look at those little rock stacks, I have like an instantaneous symbolic recentering device. And so just like looking at all these things where it's like, oh my gosh, like technologically, it's like there's so much empowerment to be had around like what this can actually look like in strategizing like a really fun navigational like protocol for like this Jedi art of presence and mastery. And I just think the challenge, which is like, I think kind of the perennial challenge, at least in the way I'm interpreting it at the root of this, is like forgetfulness, and like the way that amnesia sets in and like is a part of, I guess what I'm trying to say is a part of the amnesia is like where and how we're in a lifestyle of remembrance. And it's like, what are our remembrance technologies that like constantly refresh these different ways of being, in the same way that we need to constantly drink water. I think there's a really cool physiological correlate. It's like you eat 3 times a day and there's like a good reason for it. And it's like metaphysically or spiritually, it's like, what are our refreshment protocols
right
that bring us back into this nourishment, where it's like we're not just like having a hot idea and then letting it fall to the wayside, but like actually understanding like what the necessary ingredients are that like feed it on a daily, regular basis.
Completely. Memory can be pushed away. So when we're talking about, we come into these like higher consciousness states, it's a lot easier to do that when you're on the mountain. But then when you're in the hustle and bustle of all these different perspectives and collective fields and chaos, it's like, how quickly do you forget? Because that's what shows your resilience, right? Or at least your true level of embodiment is how you can remember that. So what technologies can we use to help remember these more lucid higher states so that we can make them more of our integrated self? And so this then brings me to this idea of reframing, and how important I feel like reframing is, because it seems like the process for me very often is that I run into a situation that I'm not prepared to interpret from like the God perspective. And so then I'm interpreting it from this kind of either wounded self or from a, like you say, like a victim self, or just maybe something that's not very lucid, or maybe it's, I'm avoiding, certain aspect of reality, to avoid pain or whatever. So I'm like, interpreting it low resolution. So then the process for me is that when I get into those spaces, I have a certain level of emotional and somatic awareness that I feel myself tie up into a knot. And so then when I feel that space, I'm like, okay, I need to like reorganize how I'm interpreting things here. And so then I can sit and then I can reinterpret the situation through a creative process of, if I was to simplify it, to say like, well, how would like a God look at this situation? So then that brings in lenses of compassion. It brings in lenses of looking for the beauty, the true, the beautiful, and the good, right, in the situation. And then when I start looking through that perspective, I can, with a certain amount of intention, I can always come out with a beautiful interpretation of it, where I feel grateful for whatever the situation was. And then it actually can be a source of fuel for me. But, sometimes that requires a bit of effort, whether that be like an hour of just like sitting in one space and like working with the different pieces until I learn how to reposition myself in relation to it and then absorb it as something beautiful. And in those reframing processes, those are points where it's like, I'm like rearranging like the data and my relationship to the data, like within my entire psyche in space. And then it like lights up pockets of dead weight within my consciousness. And then, so expanding upon that with what we're talking about, in the sense of being able to, through that process of reframing, after reframing it, having a technological means for, whether that be like stacking rocks in your room, so that every time you look at those rocks, you're reminded of that. And then you have this symbolic association with the stacked rocks. So you can encapsulate like a really, really deep concept into something very simple. And then the power of that really small, simple thing is really potent and useful, especially the more you contemplate on it in complexity. So then, in the sense, like just a quick image flash of rocks inside your mind can have the effect of like a 3-hour-long contemplative process, which helps you come to a greater realization about something. And then you have access to that like energetic movement with like a very simple thought process. For this seems to be like, to more actively apply this technique more consciously and strategically, seems to be right in line with the answer to the question that we're asking ourselves right now. We started today.
What was the question we started with today?
Well, it was like, how do we optimize, right? So how do we optimize our ability to shift between the absolute and then the hyper granulated, like everyday focus? And how do we like retain that bigness within the small space?
Yeah.
So, how I'm seeing that is that we can do that by, when we're in the big space, being able to associate different archetypes to these like really vast truths that we're able to like contain in there. And then as we move throughout our day, and this works in both directions, we move without our day and run into difficult things, we can start assigning, where appropriate, some of these archetypes to those little things, so that there's an associative connection. And then when we approach these small things, it's actually connected to these greater grand epiphany truths, so that we're not slowed down by the small things in our everyday life. In fact, those small things that usually irked us can start fueling us, because there's a direct correlation and association between these bigger truths that we found. And in that space, it will naturally give us more momentum and more levity, which will indirectly help with, I believe, the memory process. Because a lot of what I've noticed is like, what gets in the way of my memories sometimes is their stagnant, they're stagnant energies that usually come from subconscious or like semi-conscious associations that pull at my energy field and make me less capable of being able to operate optimally. So what it'll be is that like, I'm dealing with something, and then I'll run into like a thought that doesn't quite crystallize, but it's this energy of like, oh, my memory's not working, and now I'm frustrated about that. Right. And that kind of just like sits in my field, and it's not, it didn't necessarily come up to and crystallize to the point where it was like clear for me to deal with that, but there could be like a whole host of like 10 or 12 of these things kind of in the field creating this fog that you're talking about, right? And the fog is just kind of like my oftentimes is my associative dissonance with different things in the reality that I haven't gone to the work of reframing and lucidly perceiving from like a higher perspective. So when I can do that and reframe it and then have a positive perspective, then I'm seeing the truth in it. And that God perspective truth then fuels me. And then that fuel gives me the capacity to be very articulate and have very accurate synchronistic memory that can like pop into place when necessary.
Okay, had to cut it off there. So thanks so much for tuning in. This is Patrick Hayes. If you liked this format, please let me know. Put it down in the comments, because like I said, I'd love to share more of this this side of me with you, where I'm talking to different people and, just having more casual conversations. So like, subscribe, share with your friends. Thanks so much for tuning in. This is Patrick Hayes, and I'll talk to you next time.